In a second-hand set of dimensions, on an astral plane that was never meant to fly, through wavering star mists, see the Grey Satuin. Drifting onwards through space, atop the shell of the world's turtle, are 4 giant elephants, upon whose broad shoulders rests the Discworld. Welcome to Dining Table Discworld. We're reading through the Discworld novels and discussing them at our dining table. Be aware there will be spoilers for the current book and others in the series.
Hello, welcome to Dining Table Discworld. I'm Dave.
And I'm Kathy.
And today we're talking about The Colour of Magic by Terry Pratchett. It's the first of the Discworld novels and was published in 1983.
So, Colour of Magic is about Rincewind, a rubbish wizard, who ends up guiding the Disc's first tourist through increasingly dangerous adventures from the noisome city of Ankh-Morpork to the very rim of the Disc itself.
A long way.
Yes, noisome is harder to say than it is to write, but there we go. So what were your initial impressions of this book?
Well, the first time I read it was a long time ago, so my initial impressions are clouded in time. And it was not the first Terry Pratchett book I read. I started with Mort and had read at least a couple more before I went back to actually start at the start. So I think it comes as a bit of a shock after, it is actually quite different to the later stuff. Enjoyable, yes. Perhaps a little inaccessible if you don't necessarily understand some of the tropes it's referencing, which we'll be talking about later. So what was your first thoughts?
Yeah, so as with you, I started reading Discworld quite a long time ago, and I didn't start with this one. I can't remember at what point I went back to this one, because I'm guessing there were a few more Discworld books out when I started than when you started.
Just a few.
And so I read quite a few out of order for a bit, depending on what struck my eye in the bookshop. So yeah, I don't remember a lot about it. I do remember thinking this is obviously referencing a load of stuff that I'm only dimly aware of. So Terry himself said it was like a spoof of stuff, and I think he's mostly trying to just have fun with some ideas, so which is fine. But yeah, if you don't know what it's referencing, you can kind of tell it's funny, but you don't fully get the joke. And I think even rereading it just recently, there's still an element of that. Like, I've read more broadly, I know more things now, but I've not read Fritz Lieber. Mm-hmm. I've kind of only secondhand aware of like Lovecrafty stuff, although obviously so much stuff's influenced by that. So I've not technically read much Pern other than the short story here and there. So
okay, well,
yeah, I think again I liked it, but not as much as others.
Yeah, right then. So what stood out to you in our rereads?
So yeah, obviously the main thing is the introduction of Ankh-Morpork, and it starts there, and that's kind of, he's riffing off of very traditional fantasy stuff, and obviously the medievalish city. Although culturally in pop culture, most stuff that's sort of done is like, well, this is medieval. It's actually more early modern, but that's a whole different discussion. Medieval cities,
out of the scope of this podcast.
Yeah, medieval cities were not quite the cesspools that sort of fantasy likes to depict them as. But so you've got the city, and it very much starts with the city as character. You've got 2 people watching as the city burns and commenting on it. And then they're based on the Fritz Lieber characters, and then you don't get Rincewind come along until a bit, and you see 2 Flower and the Luggage, and it's kind of very much a prologue, and it goes back to what happens. So, I mean, it's stereotypical on purpose. I think Pratchett's doing that whole fish out of water thing, somebody being guided around the city, a kind of like an ingenue character in 2 Flower, who comes from obviously a completely different part of the Disc.
I'm going to bring this up now. How do we feel about Toothflower as a stereotype? He's a walking stereotype from the 80s. I mean, personally, I can see where what it's riffing off. But it does feel kind of
uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I mean, we recently watched the Colour of Magic, first part of the Colour of Magic TV show, and he was played by a Western actor in that.
Yeah, white actor. Yeah,
because I think if you'd have made him, East Asian, it would have just been really cringeworthy. And I think it's...
Yeah, well, I think there's a question there. So, I mean, in the book, it's clear that Pratchett's kind of doing a sort of like East Asian, probably, let's face it, largely Japanese stereotype tourist.
Yeah.
You know, like taking a lot of pictures and that sort of thing. Although, obviously, they don't quite exactly have races as the way we do in the Discworld, although that will come from other episodes as well. There's a thing with him having two eyes, which is kind of partly a joke on the fact that he's presumably wearing glasses in a society where people don't generally wear glasses. Although a lot of the artwork actually shows him having, for like on the cover of the book, and also I think the graphic novel mostly has them with glasses you can't see through, but when you do see through them, there are four eyes behind there. So it's kind of, again, it's a bit of a joke. But yeah, Ankh-Morpork's very much kind of like a southern Midlands city in Britain, but pseudo-medieval. And there's the whole thing with like Rincewind initially gets involved because he can translate and sort of talking, but then it feels a bit uncomfortable because they're clearly talking through a language that they're both, it's their second language for both of them. And again, the depiction of the culture that comes from, so, this is a very simple place and there aren't many words. It does feel a bit like tribal, and you're like, that's not brilliant. So yeah, it is a bit... The thing is, I think if people were casting it again, you could get an East Asian actor, because then, I mean, that'd be another role an East Asian actor could do.
Oh, yes.
But then I think you'd have to be careful how you did the stereotypes. It's clearly kind of that kind of office worker guy who's gone on his dream trip.
Yes.
But as a character, taking the stereotype away and just looking at him as a character, Two Flowers is kind of very two-dimensional. He's sort of like, he's really excited, but it's all it's the Disc's first tourist. It's all tourism. He's not taking any of it seriously. Rincewind's constantly telling him he's in danger. He's like, oh no, everything's fine. It's like the danger kind of bounces off of him, and you do have those characters that are so ignorant of the surroundings they're in, or it's all a story to them. And I think that kind of goes to another thing that Pratchett's exploring, to quote Pulp, everybody hates a tourist, which isn't quite true in this, but it's the idea that none of it's serious, none of it's real to him. It's just like, look, a bar fight. Oh, look, some barbarians.
Yeah,
it's
he wants to go see all these things that, to him are sort of fantastical, and obviously to Ankh-Morpork, a bar fight is actually quite a big problem, or barbarians coming and raiding. You don't want the barbarians.
Yeah, and it's kind of like this idea that his naivety means nothing touches him. So it's kind of that innocent idiot character who kind of somehow the innocence allows him to go through, and I think that's a trope in various things.
Yeah.
So I think the introduction of Ankh-Morpork, because the major city, makes sense. And then there's lots of bits of the disc, some of which you don't really ever see again, or lots of names mentioned. But I think that was just Pratchett kind of spitballing.
Well, it was just coming up with stuff to fit what the stories he wanted to tell at the time. Once they're outside of Ankh-Morpork, they end up going through fancy woodland, ending up in this mysterious ancient Lovecraftian temple, which again is just kind of him going, I want to play with what happens if there's these a tourist and a terrible wizard end up waking up dread monster from beyond time,
and there's not Pern.
Yeah, and then there's the Wormberg and the dragon stuff, which is playing off the Pern stuff definitely. I mean, yes,
I've not read a lot of Pern, but
doing its own. I mean, it's kind of saying dragons, people riding dragons, and kind of play. Certainly the main female character there has got a similar name to the main female character in the main Pern book. And then the last, because it's kind of in 4 novellas, so you got those 3 bits, and the last one feels different to other stuff, but I think maybe I don't know what it's referencing. I feel a little bit like almost spacey fantasy. Well, they're going science fantasy with an entire civilization that is revolving around investigating what the turtle that the disc rides on. Edgar
Rice Burroughs, that was it. The Princess. Well, I don't know if Princess of Mars exactly, but we're like a fantasy society, but something spacey.
Yeah,
but that may be a very broad. There may be something that's more specific.
I think he's taking notes from things and not really doing a full.
I mean, one thing I will say is still very inventive. Like, he's obviously satirising a lot of fantasy and a lot of stuff that he was reading, that people he knew were reading, that I guess was in fandom at the time. But he is doing his own thing with it. So, like, particularly with the bits in Kroll, which is this like spacefaring slave owning empire at the edge of the disc, you've got stuff like he's clearly thought about, well, it's a disc in space on the back of elephants on the back of a turtle, so, and the seas there, so you've got like the seas always falling down, so you've got the rimbo instead of the rainbow because it's around the rim, and you've got stuff like the circumfence, which is where you've got a fence,
someone's put a fence up around the outside to stop things
to catch things. And there's stuff like, he does use stuff like hubwards and rimwards as directions, which obviously carry through. So I think there's an element like he's done some wibble, he's made it his own a bit, partly to try and be funny, but I think also, we know he's got the imagination to kind of like build stuff in and stuff like that. Like you've got that water troll guy who gets bigger and smaller based on the tides, for example. That's quite interesting. And there's definitely stuff in there. I feel like it doesn't have it's not satirizing our world, so, which obviously is more of a thing later. There's also not quite that kind of compassionate anger that is in a lot of the other books. The main thing I can think of that is anything like social commentary is a bit like when Ankh-Morpork is burning, the rich parts are very busily there closing all the bridges down,
chopping down the bridges,
so the poor people can't come over, but then the fire still
the
spreads.
Ashes still spreads because it's which is very much he will be doing much more of that social satire and social commentary later on. But I think for me certainly the characters there's you get a lot of. There's lots of different characters that are.
But most of them are like familiar fancy.
Well, yes, types. That's the point. That's the point. He is just doing. But yes, you do get the barbarian character.
You get a few of those.
You do, yes.
I don't remember most of those.
You've got the gods playing dice on the mountain.
Yes.
Because much of the framing device around the later stories is basically Rincewind and Two Flower being the pawns of. The lady, while the lady is having a game of chance with fate, which leads to basically lots of random things happening to the main characters because their strings are being pulled.
Well, it's kind of super improbable stuff happens, and they keep hearing, Rincewind, I guess, being a wizard, and therefore, even though he's rubbish, still being in touch with the supernatural enough to be a bit like, can you hear dice? And they're like rolling dice, and I think in a skull or something. Which again goes into the whole gaming culture that surrounded.
But I think Rincewind as a character, you've got a wizard who has failed at being a wizard because he's got one big spell lodged in his brain, and no other all the other spells are too scared to stay there for any length of time.
That feels to me, is that a bit like that whole spell slots thing?
It's the fancy and spell casting, which is you have a number. You've
explained that to me before when I played with you. You're a bit like, oh, these are your spells, but you can do one a day. It's like, well, because you can't remember afterwards. Like, but I knew it before.
Yes,
but that's just how it works.
Jack Vance came up with it, and it wasn't. It was out. Okay. It was Chronicles of Amber, I want to say, and I'm showing my lack of research before this, but he came up with this the idea that you had certain spells you could have, and then D&D adapted it for spell slots, so you can only have 3 at a certain level, 3 third level spells, 4 second level spells, and memorized. So
I thought it was just a game mechanic. So
no, it came from that.
That's fair. Well,
so he's and the idea of this wizard that wants to be a wizard is a wizard, but also is scared of everything and will run away at the drop of a hat.
Well, I mean in this it's almost quite pragmatic. The point is Rincewind's actually showing his skill with languages. That's why he's the person who's showing Two Fly around, because he's the only person that can talk to him in Ankh-Morpork. And you get the sort of funny translation thing that Two Flowers say something and Rincewind will just translate it into like what the people want to hear. We'll be like, oh, this guy's an idiot, But they then drop that after the first one because I guess it's probably a bit annoying from a sort of narrative point of view to constantly have that lack of communication. But there's also the fact that Rincewind, like when he sees, so Two Flower has what we would call a camera, but it's called an iconographer in that, and takes pictures, which again they've never seen Ankh-Morpork before. So you've got this idea of somebody who's from a more advanced, richer and more technologically advanced society coming over, which I think is an interesting dynamic. And Rincewind has a moment where he thinks, oh, it's something to do with light and paper, and he's almost got the idea of photography, and it's like, no, there's a little imp in there, and he draws the pictures, and oh, he's out of pink now. So, and he pops out and says stuff, and there's, you almost get this idea that Rincewind is sort of hoping for something more than magic, something different, which obviously is then science. And it's kind of this whole idea that what's unfamiliar to you is desirable. So Two Flowers read all these kind of like, presumably the kind of fantasy-esque pseudo-medieval Europe things where he is, and for all that's so exotic and cool, I'm going to go there. Yeah. Rincewind, on the other hand, is sort of thinking there should be something more, there should be something else that's not quite as almost silly as magic. And then when the spell does its thing and stops him from dying in a fall, suddenly he's on a plane, like an actual aeroplane, which, and suddenly he's a different guy. Is it like he's like a Swedish guy and he's a doctor and he's met Two Flowers at the airport and they're on a plane?
It's a very odd section.
It's very postmodern. Was that a bit of a thing then?
I don't know.
It might be a thing.
It is really, really odd. And you kind of, I'd forgotten about it until the reread it.
That's the one bit I remembered. I was like, there's a lot of fancy stuff I didn't fully get, and then at one point a weird spell happens and they're on a plane, but just for like half of the scene.
Yeah, it is odd. It doesn't really lend itself. It's just there. It's just a thing.
But I think that's what Pratchett did. He was just throwing a lot of stuff together.
throwing stuff at the dartboard and see what.
And again, it goes to Two Flowers, because I know we were talking about him before, but again, his belief. I mean, I said like his innocence sort of protects him, but then in the Wormberg, it's like his absolute conviction in dragons being real and magnificent and these wonderful things you can fly means that he creates the most impressive dragon because they're dragons that are based purely on imagination, which I think is kind of a cool concept. Except, and then I guess Rincewind's imagination plus the spell goes somewhere else entirely.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention was female characters, or sort of the lack thereof, because everyone we've mentioned thus far has been a guy. Well, no, you actually mentioned a lady. So I had a look of like characters. Well, there's like a naked dryad. She doesn't have a name, and she seems to be a bit suspicious.
And there's lots
but
of
she's definitely naked.
There's lots of female dryads in that.
Well, there are also male ones as well.
Yes, but
I'm not clear if they were naked or not.
Only one of them got a speaking role though. So
yeah, but she didn't have a name. Then there's Liessa.
Yeah.
Who's the sort of dragon rider princess woman. Now she, in fairness, like, she's killed her father, she wants to take charge, but she can't because she's a woman, so she needs to marry, like, some guy, which I guess could be a point on the patriarchy. And again, the dragon riders, again, both male and female, don't seem to wear a lot. That's the whole thing they mention. And they have a thing where they dangle upside down a lot because of how the dragons roost, and kind of mentions the interesting things that does to anatomy, but only in the context of the female ones, whereas I'm sure there'd be an element of that with the blokes too. I think they just all have very tight binding tiny garments.
Yeah.
Then there's Marchesa, who seems to be a young black girl. And again, she's one of the few people whose race is actually specified, but you just know she's dark, but all the references for how dark she is based on fictional Discworld places. So
difficult
it's just
to get an idea, really.
Yeah, I think it's just that she's black, and that's what we've got. She's only in it very briefly, and she's initially covered by a cloak, but I could kind of tell it's a female character because the narrative kept saying they and their rather than specifying a gender, and everyone else's background so far had been he or him, apart from maybe I think it might have been a female beggar, but I don't remember exactly. So I was like, is this going to be a woman? And then it was a woman. She's quite young, but is a magic user, and she's just kind of like sort of an uncompromising character from Kroll, who's this kind of like space magic slave-owning empire. So that's only quite brief. And then the main one who I guess has a character in any kind of agency much. Well, no, that's not fair. Liessa does have agency. Yeah. And I suppose she does kind of like grab that Bulgarian guy and kill her dad. But I guess the main other one who has a lot of character is the lady who is, I suppose she's a god, because they've not quite gotten to anthropomorphic personifications yet. No. But it's very important you don't say her name, and then so she's fickle in nature, but that's how she is.
It's just at this point in his writing that there isn't a large number of female characters.
But I think the stuff he's spoofing didn't have one. I guess Pern did, and then that's where we obviously have like. I assume there are groups of women, but we only really have one who does anything. It's just that others are about. But then, even then, she's got like two brothers and a dad and her and some dragons of indeterminate gender. So I suppose there's various indeterminate gender, like dragons, the turtle.
Well, yes, we do currently do not know the gender of the turtle.
The luggage.
The luggage.
We haven't mentioned the luggage yet.
True, we haven't mentioned. I mean, that is another.
And that's a very Pratchett thing.
Yeah, I mean, let's just look at some more of the characters, because I mean, Rincewind is one that we'll be seeing much more of as we go through. And along with that is the luggage, which is Toothflower's magical luggage that follows him around on lots of little legs. It's a giant chest made of magic wood.
I think it's like a steamer trunk. That's how I picture it. A steamer trunk.
And it's got, I kind of go with the more the kind of like the D&D,
like pirate chest.
Yeah, the big pirate chest, or treasure chest you find.
It's some sort of big box.
It's a big box, lots of legs, and it will fight. It's got a big its insides are numerous interdimensional spaces, and one
like
of them
a weird
has
TARDIS
teeth and a mouth.
It's very belligerent. Like, it doesn't have a face or eyes, but you can tell it's looking at you and it's not pleased. And Rincewind is super scared of it,
which is fair.
Yeah, this is the thing. Rincewind in this, it's not so much he's cowardly. It's just he's in all these situations where he has to do stuff he doesn't like, and he tries to run away or enrich himself at the first opportunity until he's forced to keep going. It's just that then becomes a bit of an ongoing plot in his thing. His series.
The luggage will follow its owner around everywhere. It's immune to magic. It's immune to pretty much.
It terrorizes a pirate ship.
Yes, it terrorizes a pirate ship. It kills a kraken. Kind of. It's you don't really want to get in its way.
The thing that's interesting about that though is that Tufil's like, oh, it's just my luggage. Like, oh, it's fine. And then Rincewind sees it, and everyone's like, oh my god, it's full of gold. And Rincewind's like, that thing's made of more magical wood than is on this entire continent.
Yeah.
So it's just insanely valuable and also incredibly
you don't want so but the luggage will appear, and it is a character in of itself very much. And then talking about other characters we'll see a lot like going forward is the character of death. The anthropomorphic personification of the concept of death.
The Grim Reaper.
Yes,
very traditional. That
skeleton, robe, scythe, and so he's in quite a lot, and in fact he will be in every single Discworld book. It's varying in part, and this version of Death is a bit of an arse.
Yeah, he's not great, is he? He's a jerk. In this, it's like it's more traditional. It's like it's almost a bit like how the lady is like goddess of luck and is like using luck that. It's almost like Death's a bit like I want people to die. I want to do death because he gets angry and things die. So, but I think Pratchett was still playing with the ideas. He hadn't kind of got
I think
the thing.
The later character is very much death comes to us all. He will come and he comes and
he'll do the duty.
Yeah, but he does not kill. It's other things that kills.
He's what comes after.
Yeah, so he never. But in this Colour of Magic, you do see him. He gets annoyed when
he's trying to hunt. He's basically stalking and hunting Rincewind.
And then when Rincewind gets out of things because the lady sort of tweaks things, he gets annoyed and will just randomly kill things. I mean, nothing major. I mean, we're talking
it's like animals.
Yeah, clouds of mayflies and things like that. But that is very much against what you'll see in later even books. A few books later. Yeah. I mean, because Mort is a very, and I think that's where he gets his character.
You've got to consider this one was the first one. The next one came out 3 years later, whereas later he's knocking out 3 a year.
It's just interesting to see. That this character isn't the one. As I say, if you've read,
it's not the one that's beloved of many.
No, and if you've read Mort, like I did a study, it is a bit of a tonal shift for the character. So but I look forward to talking more about death.
Yeah, I think the character. It's not that kind of podcast.
No.
I think it's sort of going with the sort of like it's like the thing you get a lot of things like the deaf god. I mean, it doesn't call him a god. That's kind of what's happening there. Is evil and sinister, which you get a lot of if you look at like a lot of modern Hollywood versions of, say, Greek mythology. You quite often have the deaf god is like he's like the devil and it's hell. It's like that's not the cosmology of this civilization. But it's quite often a bit like fire and Hades is like the devil and he wants people to die. It's like no, that's not really what the deal was originally. But I think it's that thing. It's like the character that's in charge of death must be evil because death is a bad thing. Yeah. It's like, well, it's actually more complex than that. But again, I guess what Pratchett was riffing off of that was quite a standard thing.
Yeah.
And the reason Rincewind can see him is because he's a wizard, even though he's a terrible wizard, is that all wizards get seen to by death person. There's kind of an idea that death doesn't show up for everyone at this point, just for certain people, but that also he has minions. So at the end, Rincewind encounters Scrofula, which, quite relevantly, Scrofula is the illness that people used to believe that monarchs could cure with a touch. Apparently people thought that in 1952. Like when the Queen was coronated, there were some people who thought that she could still cure Scrofula, even though James I of England, 6th of Scotland, had actually tried to take that whole thing out when he was coronated back in 1605. So
there you go. You learn something new every day.
Yeah, I just thought it was funny with the Scrofula. But then Rincewind says, no, I'm a wizard, so I can't die because you're not the one that's supposed to come to me. Also, he wasn't exactly in a position to be killed by Scrofula. There are many other things that could have killed him at that point.
And then there's a couple of other characters that briefly show up, or at least, one of them being the patrician of Ankh-Morpork.
Yes, who I think, again, is a lot of this is like proto stuff.
Yeah,
so
it's
I
very
think it's
much
a different guy to Vetinari.
Yes, I mean...
But Vetinari obviously has to come to power at some point. And it does feel like the fire at the beginning, because the drum, which is the mended drum for most of Discworld,
again, a good character for a location character.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so that's like the main, the fantasy tavern where you go and the barbarians are, and you get your quest, and there's a wizard there. But yeah, it's called the broken drum, and it gets burnt down because Two Flower introduces the concept of insurance, and as soon as he introduces the concept of insurance, somebody immediately commits insurance fraud.
Of course.
Because it's Ankh-Morpork, and then sets fire to most of the city. And again, that's where Death shows up, but he almost seems a bit gleeful about it.
Well, yes, he assists in that character's death.
And then presumably deaths of anyone else caught in that very large fire.
Yes.
But in that, the point is later it's called the mended drum because of what happened, but it was the broken drum before. But
yes, but anyway, we're talking about the patrician there.
Yeah, sorry, but I was just saying it feels like this is probably actually a turning point a bit for the city. Like there's a suggestion of how it was before, and then we see this patrician, but presumably at some point in the next few books there'll be changes happening.
Well, yeah, because in the next few books you don't.
I don't think it still guards.
It's not until the Watch One start you actually.
And I think the timeline's a bit iffy at the beginning.
Yeah, and again, timelines in Discworld will come up later, especially around one of the books. So, but yeah, the patrician is a character that's mentioned, but yes, he's not one. You will have a patrician later, which again is much more, I would say, beloved. Not quite.
More efficient and
but beloved by fans of the city of readers rather than.
This guy doesn't have a name. He's just the patrician, and it's kind of that sort of like, I am the corrupt city leader who has a big spy network. I mean, okay, that works for Vetinari, but also he's eating all these like weird things, like he's eating like starfish. It's like this idea of having incredibly rich and wealthy food that's just a load of weird stuff, like I guess whatever caviar is. I mean, I know it's fish eggs, but it sounds gross.
That's fair enough.
But rich people like that because it's posh.
Yes. So yes, we'll have the patrician later, and also we get to see some of the guilds, which is very big in Ankh-Morpork. Which
that feels to me like one of the changes. So you've got assassins and thieves; they're very much there, and then you have the Merchants Guild just starts because Two Flower turns up. The concept of tourism and it bringing money is brought to the attention of people at Ankh-Morpork, and so people are a bit like, maybe you should stop having bar rules so people can come here and spend money in our businesses. And that's like the start of the Merchants Guild. And to me, it feels like that's the start of there being an explosion of guilds. But I know you thought they were older.
I think they're old. I think they're older. I think because there's. While it's not mentioned, it gets the feeling like there is a beggars guild.
I didn't know that was a guild. I thought that was just like a load of beggars working together.
No, there is actually a beggars guild.
Was there? Oh, I thought they were just like beggars who were reporting to thieves and.
No, I think in the book, it's not really expressed whether it's the guild, but there is in Ankh-Morpork there is a beggars guild.
I know there's a beggars guild in Ankh-Morpork. Yes. What I'm saying is I don't know if this book is an existing guild.
It doesn't really give
because there are beggars. Yeah. But yeah, they're clearly just operating, and they're clearly operating together in a kind of like gang. But it's not clear whether it's actually a guild or just a loose.
We're in place already, and it's just in this. Yeah, you don't see them. It comes down to how long between book.
No, that's fair enough.
So it's one of those that it's again timeline, and I think guilds within a city is quite a standard trope. I think later on he expands it out.
I guess we'll go into that later when we talk about those a bit more.
We do, yes. Is there anything else you want to bring up?
Probably. I think it feels less. I say less joke heavy. I think a lot of the jokes are references, which, as we've said, we probably. Sometimes you can tell there's a reference, but you're not fully getting it. And then there's probably lots of things that just kind of went over my head a bit. I think
it's the early books I've always considered being a bit more laugh out loud funny, but I found them well, but. This one isn't. I mean, it's funny.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But I haven't sat there and
no
was laughing.
When you say laugh out loud, I suppose the later ones, it's sometimes almost a bit more structured, but there are still some incredibly funny character interactions.
There is some great humour in the later
these
ones.
feel a bit more slapsticky, I guess, or not. Well, kind of. There's a bit of that.
I think over the years he changes his,
which is fair enough.
Yeah, which is great, and
working.
And I think there's a certain amount of the learning, but this one is just.
But sometimes there's stuff where there's a bit like there'll be this very deep and complex like reference to all the stuff and like a satirizing of something in our world, and then there'll be another level where there's just people being amusing in an interaction, and there'll be another level where somebody's just said something you're like, oh, the pun, and we've not got the levels yet. The main one I liked was the thing about an astral plane that was never meant to fly, which I found quite funny when I read it as a word. And then later, there's a plane in the book.
True.
And I don't know if that's on purpose, but I found that quite funny.
I suppose the only the closest we get in here is the one about the echoing.
Oh yes, Yes, two flowers clearly, an insurance claims analyst. Yes. Is that it?
Yes.
He's not selling it. He's just analysing he's an analyst. He's figuring out the probabilities. That's it. And so there's a joke about he keeps saying in sewer ants because that's the only way they can figure out the translation. So you realise that's insurance, and then they keep saying, "Oh, the sound of underwater spirits." And I sat there going, "This is clearly a joke," and I cannot remember what the joke is. And then later he's like, "Oh, somebody do the sound of underwater spirits." Then you're like, "Oh, it's economics."
Yeah,
and you're like, "Oh, oh, yeah."
Yes. So I mean,
okay.
so you definitely get more of that later. This was an early,
but there's more stuff around it. Yes. I think when there's that later.
Yeah. Which is
that's fair enough.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously Pratchett is one of our nation's most beloved comic fantasy authors, and also he's not the reason, publishing's the reason, but also there's an element, I've heard people who write comic fantasy be a bit like, who've like, is it like Pratchett? It's like, well, no, but he's such a big part of the landscape that, it's a bit like, oh, is it funny like this, like that was the mode, that became the mode of it, but at this point it hadn't become the mode of it, it was just him like coming up with his own inventive stuff and sticking a lot of like pastiche and spoon.
Yeah, and I suppose for us it's difficult to really we never read it at the time that it was at. Well,
that would have been impossible for me. For you're a little bit older than Discworld, and I'm a little bit younger than it.
Yes, but I still my reading's good, but not that good. But yeah, I mean that's the thing. It's difficult for us to really we can see that but we weren't there reading, so we didn't, it is the start of something.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And again, you can tell there's a lot of geography thrown in, because, again, I mean, it's not doing quest narrative. It's not a quest, so that's one thing that's different. Yeah. But there is very much like, it's more like a travelogue. So we're going to this place, we're going to those places. And a lot of them are places I don't think come back again. But there are bits that mentioned. Clatch gets mentioned. That's the main one I recognise. Lots of names are said, like fantasy names.
And bits and pieces are thrown in that he'll come back to later. The Wizard's War.
It's kind of the whole, again, that's kind of fantasy trope a bit like, there was magic before and it all went a bit wrong and terrible, and now the remains of it still are around the landscape, stuff like that. And again, it did remind me a little bit of like Tough Guide to Fantasyland and then Dark Lord of Dirkholm, where you've got the whole tourist thing, which was published later, but I think was coming from a similar place of a bit like, you are on your fantasy adventure, here are various trope things you will meet. But okay, so summing things up. Yeah, final thoughts. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to try not to talk over each other. So as I enjoyed the book, but I wouldn't suggest people start Pratchett with this one.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, I wouldn't necessarily suggest they read it until perhaps they're getting towards the first Rincewind heavy book. So they've actually got a bit of a grounding, and then go, right, okay, now read this one. This will give you this will introduce the character. I
can see that. I think the issue is you don't know, because obviously there's all the sub-series, and you don't know which things are going to jive with people more than others. Yeah. So, I mean, if they really liked sorcery, you'd be a bit like, oh, there's more of this guy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I suppose sorcery is the next one.
It is the next one. It's the one I know best, but that's because it was a book I had to read on a camping trip, so I ended up reading it a few times because I didn't have all my books then.
Which is fair.
Yeah. I think I also read loads of my mum's books as well, which were just books about ladies from the turn of the century. The turn of the other century.
So what do you think, Pete? When do you...
Yeah, it wouldn't be my first suggestion it's something to read if you want to read all of it, if you want to see it starting, but I feel like you probably need to have like got into some other bits first before this. But I mean, obviously people did read it at the first and then kept going.
I mean, it's obviously,
but they didn't know there was better stuff coming at that point. That's fair, I suppose. I don't know, but it's fine. It's obviously it's about a certain number of things that I only have a vague knowledge of. It probably would be funnier if I knew more about those things, but I don't think it's aged particularly badly, though.
Oh no, it's not aged badly. It's not. It's
fine.
As I say, the only iffy thing is going to be the representation of two flowers. So,
there's a bit of that.
But I mean, that's not done as a mean.
No, it's just him playing with a stereotype.
With the stereotype that was about at the time.
And I think we'll probably another episode talk more about how he does some of that stuff later on. But I think I wouldn't start with it if I was recommending somebody new to Discworld. But you can see the stuff. You can see the imagination. That I mean, the whole concept of the disc. The fact that he's obviously done enough world building to go, here's a ridiculous world that's nonsense. So what can I throw at it and what can I put in there? And obviously he's pulling from a lot of things. I think he's amusing himself, and I think that comes through that he is enjoying himself and having fun with it. So it's in no way po-faced at any point. It's not taking itself too seriously, and so I think the fun of it is definitely there. It's just I suppose having read later stuff, we've come to expect the high standards.
Yes, I think that's but that's the interest of going back and rereading. Yeah. So we hope you enjoyed that discussion of Colour of Magic. We shall be back next time where we'll be going to reading the companion novel, effectively. This does end on a cliffhanger or a hanging off a branch off the edge of the world hanger. So we will go straight into following like Fantastic, following Rincewind further.
Yes, although interestingly, the next one there's a 3-year gap, so I guess I had a bit of time to think about.
I think this one sold so well. Then he had to went, hang on a second, I'm going to have to write something with a story. I think the next one is much more. So we get more things introduced. More things fleshed out.
We'll get into that.
And we'll get to that. So,
okay. Well, thank you very much for listening. We hope you have enjoyed it. There will be more to come. And so it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me. Thank you for listening to Dining Table Discworld. You can find us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Dining Table Discworld. You can also find us on BlueSky at dtdiscworld. All our other contact information and credits for our music can be found in our show notes. Thank you for listening again, and we'll see you in our next episode.